How's it going, you excellent bunch of bakers? Welcome back to another video. Today I'll show you everything you need to know about baker's percentage. So let's get in the kitchen and get started. Baker's percentage is a universal language which bakers use for reading, writing, adjusting and sharing recipe formulas. Knowing how to read it gives us the ability to instantly recognize the basic characteristics of the bread which is made using that specific formula. It is an incredibly simple concept. Every ingredient is calculated as a percentage in relation to the total amount of flour. No matter how much flour is used in a recipe, the amount of flour will always be 100%. Dough hydration and baker's percentage are intertwined. Hydration is the measure of water content in a bread dough recipe, which is also expressed as a percentage. Bakers often describe breads mentioning the hydration percentage as one of the main attributes. The hydration level depends on the desired final product. Chewy bagels could be made with as little as 50% hydration, while a light and airy high hydration ciabatta could go up to 100% or even more. Yeast comes in different forms, from active dry, instant dry and fresh yeast. It could range from less than 1% to up to 4%, and salt usually sits between 1 to 2.5%. A few simple formulas allow us to calculate any and every ingredient in a bread dough recipe. First, let's look at how to calculate percentages in a set recipe, assuming that we know the amounts of all the ingredients. It might be one of my recipes, or it may be a recipe you found in a book. It has all the ingredients listed, but you want to know the baker's percentage values. To keep it simple, we use a basic recipe of only flour, water, yeast and salt. It will be a recipe with 500 grams of flour, 350 grams of water, 5 grams of yeast and 10 grams of salt. Now we already know that flour will be 100% because that's the rule. Finding out the percentage of the other ingredients is pretty straightforward, as long as you have a calculator. All you need to do is divide the weight of the ingredient in question by the weight of the flour. So when it comes to water, it will be 350 divided by 500 equals 0.7, and that's 70%, which means that the dough has a hydration of 70%. When it comes to yeast, it is 5 divided by 500, which equals 0.01, which is 1%. And the salt, of course, is calculated the same way, and it equals to 2%. Next, let's look at calculating the weight of the ingredient, assuming you know the percentages. We also need to know the amount of flour, because that is the main ingredient and it's always 100%. We calculate all the other ingredients according to the flour. Once again, we'll do a basic example with a recipe containing only flour, water, yeast and salt. Flour will be 100%, water will be 65%, yeast 1.4% and salt 1.8%. As an example here, the weight of the flour will be 500 grams. It is the only weight we must know to calculate the other ingredients. All we need to do is multiply the weight of the flour by the percentage. So when it comes to water, it will be 500 times 0.65, which is 325 grams. Yeast will be 500 times 0.014, which results in 7 grams. And for the salt, it will be 500 times 0.018, which results in 9 grams. Multiplying the weight of the flour by the percentage of the ingredient gives us the weight of the ingredient. Okay, next let's look at building a recipe formula from scratch. This will be a little bit more interesting, but it's still super simple. And it is the final set of formulas that you need to know. It completes the set of baker's maths. Okay, whenever you are writing a recipe, you would first come up with the baker's percentage for the individual ingredients. For this example, I've chosen flour, water, yeast and salt. The flour will be 100%, the water will be 63%, the yeast will be 1% and the salt will be 2%. If you are using more than one type of flour, then the sum of all the flours will be 100%. Okay, I've chosen my percentages. Next, I need to decide how many breads that I'm making and how much each of them will weigh. For this example, I've chosen 10 buns at the weight of 150 grams each. So the total weight of the dough will be 10 times 150, which gives us 1500 grams or 1.5 kilos. Next, we must add up the baker's percentage values of all the ingredients, so 100 plus 63 plus 1 plus 2, which equals 166. That is the total number of percent or total parts of this recipe. Next, we will calculate the weight of a single part or a single percent, which we will do by dividing the total weight of the dough by the total percentage value. And that will be 1500 divided by 166, which results in 9.03 grams. That is how much 1% of this dough will weigh. And I'm sure you can already see what I'm getting at. Now for simplicity's sake, we'll round down that number to 9 grams. The recipe will look much neater and cleaner that way. Okay, now we can easily calculate the weight of each ingredient. And we'll start with the flour, because that's a nice round number. We know that 1% is 9 grams, so 100% will be 900 grams. And of course, as soon as we know the weight of the flour, we can calculate all the other ingredients by multiplying the percentage value of the ingredient by the weight of the flour. Or alternatively, you can multiply each percentage with the weight of 1%. Personally, I prefer the first method. Adding up all the ingredients after calculating the weights results in a total dough weight of 1494 grams. We are 6 grams short because we rounded down from 9.03 to 9 grams. But I would rather have it this way instead of having a recipe with 903 grams of flour. But you can do it either way, it's up to you. Of course, you will not always have recipes with just flour, water, yeast and salt. Bread dough recipes can have many other ingredients in them, all of which will be still calculated as a percentage in relation to the flour. Fats could be as little as 3% for everyday bread, but they can go up to 40% when it comes to festive breads. Some of the fats used in bread making are oils like olive oil or vegetable oil, animal fats like lard or beef suet, and of course butter and margarine are also commonly used. Sugars can also be used sparingly at around 3%, but they can go up to 20% even. And they come in different forms too, like granulated sugar, honey, treacle or molasses, and maple syrup, amongst plenty of others. Now when it comes to these ingredients, it is not only the percentage of the ingredient itself that is important. Depending on how much of each ingredient we want to use, we might need to consider the other ingredients that these ingredients contain. There's not much when it comes to oils and animal fats, because they are pretty much 100% fat. But butter and margarine can both contain around 20% water, so adding fat to our dough doesn't just increase the fat content, it also increases the hydration sometimes. When it comes to the different sugars, of course granulated sugar is 100% sugar, but honey and treacle can contain up to 20% of water. And when it comes to runny maple syrup, that is 30% water. I'm not saying that you should worry about the water content of every ingredient, but it is worth considering if you are going to use the ingredients in large quantities. I have made videos about the effects of all the different ingredients used in bread making, and you can find those videos in the Principles of Baking playlist. If I included all the information here, this video would be hours long. Okay, let's look at some more ingredients that you may add to your bread dough. This time it will be various milk products, from regular milk, to yogurt, to buttermilk, and to sour cream. You can find recipes using all these ingredients right here on my channel. Now regular milk is about 90% water, yogurt could be around 86%, buttermilk is also 90% water, and sour cream around 74%. It all depends on the variety that you get. When it comes to fat content, milk can be as low as 0.3% and up to 3.5% or even more. Yogurt can be 0.3 also, and up to 5 or even 10% in some cases. Buttermilk is very lean, at only 0.5% fat, and sour cream can range from 15 to 25 or even more. It's really worth knowing the effects of each ingredient, because looking at this piece of paper here, you may think that adding fatty yogurt to bread dough would make it softer and stretchier as opposed to the lean milk. But it would be quite the opposite. The acidity of yogurt has a tightening effect on gluten. You could add way more yogurt to bread dough than you would be able to add milk, and it will still have the same consistency. Okay, finally let's look at eggs, because they come in different forms too. There's the whole egg, there's the egg yolk, and the egg white. A whole egg has a water content of 75%, an egg yolk has a water content of 50%, and an egg white has a water content of 90%. Now, unlike most of the other ingredients, when it comes to eggs, I always consider the water content of the egg, and I calculate it as part of the total hydration of the dough. And I do the same for the fat. A whole egg contains about 9% fat, an egg yolk has 30% fat, and the egg white is 0% fat. That pretty much covers all the most common ingredients. Of course, there are also seeds and grains that can be added. In some cases, those can even lower the hydration of the dough. You can find a separate video about those in the Principles of Baking playlist. Okay, let's make some bread and look at some real-life examples of what we just talked about. I will make 3 loaves of bread, all containing 1% yeast, 2% salt, but with different hydration levels, from 60% to 66% to 72%. They all contain the same amount of flour, which is 150 grams. And you can use your newly acquired baker's percentage knowledge to calculate the rest. Throughout the rest of the video, the breads will be in the same order from left to right, 60%, 66%, 72%. To make the job of recording more efficient, I already have mixed the yeast and salt with the flour. As you saw, the 60% hydration dough was quite stiff, whilst the 66% one is visibly stickier. And of course the 72% hydration one will be even looser and stickier than the 66% one. As the amount of water increases, the dough becomes stickier and stretchier, because the flour has a harder time absorbing all that water. We can manipulate the high hydration dough to make it more cohesive and easier to work with. We can slow ferment it to give more time for the flour to absorb the water. We can fold it more tightly, and we can fold it more often. And we can pre-shape it and shape it more tightly as well. When it comes to handling sticky dough, you have a couple of choices. You can either wet your hands with water if you are handling the dough up in the air, or you can use a dusting of flour when you are working with the dough on the table. Well, why would we increase the hydration of the dough in the first place? While it may be more difficult to work with, the result could be worth the effort. The more water you add to bread dough, the more it will rise as it ferments and bakes, resulting in a more open and light crumb. And if you are chasing those distinct bubbles in the crumb, high hydration is the one you should go with. Of course, it's not as simple as just adding more water. Achieving a certain shape and a crumb structure does take a bit of skill. Shaping tightly, not degassing the dough too much, fermenting it enough, and of course baking it correctly. Many little things go into it. Way too much for the length of this video. I just want to show you the subtle differences which we'll be able to observe in the crumb of all these breads, just so you have some visual representation of percentage of water and crumb structure. I could have definitely proofed these bad boys for a bit longer, but I ran out of time. They have cooled down, so let's cut them open and see inside. They're still in the same order: 60% hydration, 66% hydration, and 72% hydration from left to right. As you can see, the 60% hydration loaf has the tightest crumb with the smallest bubbles. It is also not as soft as the other two. The crumb of the 66% hydration bread is more open and it's softer, and the 72% hydration one even more so. So what do you think of Baker's percentage? And does it come handy in your baking? Let me know down in the comments. If you want to see more videos like this one, click over here. Subscribe to the channel, click right here. That's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.